Welcome to the LTC Peregrine DadCast, and it is Christmas Eve, and we are here together, Dave Roberts and myself, co-hosts of the DadCast, and we are taking a little time, a little moment today as we head into the Holy Nights and the reflective time of the year where, we were talking about how the memory really lives in our bodies, and that can affect the way we maneuver through the holidays, no matter what you celebrate. And so let's talk a little bit about that today, and let everybody know that as fellow peregrines, we are here for you. We are here thinking about you and all of our brothers out there across the world who are sitting with this tonight and tomorrow and through the new year. It's another year. It's another year. The wheel spins, and here we are, finding ways to connect with our kids. How are you experiencing this time, Dave?
Well, for those who don't know, I am a peregrine who's been on the path for over 20 years. It'll be 21 years in March of 2024. And as you know, Henry, you know my background. I'm sure most everybody who's listened to this knows my background. In 20 years, I have found peace with the transition of my daughter, Janine, who was 18 years old, when she transitioned on March 1st, 2003 of a rare form of cancer. But just because I'm at peace doesn't mean I still don't experience the pangs of grief, the yearnings of grief. And a lot of times it will happen when I'm emotionally on the surface okay. And like I was telling you earlier, this time of year I have trouble sleeping because she transitioned March 1st. Christmas was the last holiday that she spent with us. And I remember shortly after Christmas, we were in our family room, which was an accomplishment. We were by ourselves, which was an accomplishment because at the time of her illness, we had her significant other, her daughter and my granddaughter, Brianna, their cat, with my two cats, my two sons, and my wife, Sherry. We were all living in a single level ranch. And the joke at that time was how many 2- and 4-leggeds could you get into a single level ranch comfortably? And we were by ourselves. And I remember she had done a lot for everybody for Christmas. And I remember taking her out to lunch and going Christmas shopping. And then all of a sudden she got reflective and she looked at me and she goes, Dad, she goes, I know I did a lot for Christmas this year. She goes, but I'm not sure I'm going to be here next year. And what that told me was not that she wasn't sure. She was cushioning the blow, I think, a little bit. She knew she wasn't going to be here. Yeah. And I knew she wasn't going to be here. So even though I've gotten past that emotionally, I realized that sharing that with me was an actual gift later in grief because it prevented me from answering the question, had she had asked it, am I going to die? Because she pretty much told me I'm going to die. I'm going to transition. This is going to be my last Christmas. But I still get those body memories. And in early grief, as you know, there's always difficulty sleeping. There's difficulty with energy. There's distractibility. And I've been finding myself going to bed about the last few nights about 11:30. I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I can't get back to sleep. Sometimes I'll get up a little earlier than that. Get up, and then, Mother Nature will usually call in the middle of the night. I take care of that and try to go back to bed. But I still have trouble sleeping, and it's a very restless sleep. But I recognize that as another way for me to remember. I recognize that my body in some ways is still going to carry that trauma. Even when I don't feel the need to talk about it, or I don't think I need to talk about it, my body talks about it for me. And that also makes me aware of the fact that I need to be maybe more mindful of self-care around the times where my body is speaking grief.
That's very astute, and I experienced a very similar thing after 15 years. And Cameron also developed a rare form of of brain cancer in kids. Usually what he had is found in men over 45. So why an 11-year-old would have gotten this, and it was very fast growing. And they got most of it out with his brain surgery, but the 10% of the tumor that was left decided it needed to do its business and, stick around. And he lived twice as long as they expected him to, which I'm grateful for that we had those time.
Mhm.
And most of those days were precious. I mean, he was cognizant, he was cohesive, he was active. He did a whole series of what he called talkie blogs on
Mhm. Mhm.
YouTube. And most of them were reassuring people. Let just, as they do, they somehow have some kind of a grace, some kind of an inner wisdom that they know what's going on in them. And Cameron's awareness of his longevity actually started many years before he developed this cancer.
Mhm.
I remember tucking him in. He was probably 7 or 8 years old, and we had a tradition of him thinking about a question to ask me at bedtime. And if I had an answer, I would do my best to answer it. And if I didn't have an answer, I would go and find the answer and bring it to him
Mhm.
the next night.
Mhm.
And I can't remember what the question was that night, but my response was, "Well, we'll revisit that when you're grown up." And he said, "Oh, Papa, I'm not going to grow up." And there was sort of a lump in my throat that came up. I was like,
Wow.
"What do you say to that, to your 7-year-old who says they're not going to grow up?" He had a deeper awareness, and I think he inherited that from me, because when I was
Mhm.
8 years old, about the
Mhm.
same age, we had an assignment to bring home and write a paragraph. It was second grade, I think. And the question that we had to write about was, what is your greatest fear? And I think I've talked about this before,
Yep.
where I couldn't think of anything. I wasn't a fearful child. I wasn't afraid of a monster under my bed or in my closet, or I wasn't afraid of bugs. I wasn't afraid of the dark. I wasn't that kid. And so it was a real challenge for me to think about what can I name as a fear? And the only thing that came to me was outliving my children. I was
Mhm.
8 years old. So there's something deeper happening, I think, in our subconscious, at a different frequency that works in us as human beings. If we can really, think about the fact that we're all energy, we're all frequency, and those things can never be created and they can't be destroyed. And so, what does that mean for death? It means that essentially death is an illusion. And so,
Mhm.
those of us that are at this physical frequency can think about, where is the frequency of my child right now?
Yep.
And I find those frequencies on milestone days, be it birthday, be it holiday, New Year's, holy nights, where it comes to me as restless sleep. It comes to me as sleep paralysis, where I can't wake up from a sleep.
Mhm.
I may be
Mhm.
restless, but I can't open my eyes or even wiggle my toe. And so I look forward to those times now,
Mhm.
where, like you say, it's our body communicating with us and protecting us from waking life triggers that hit us unexpectedly. You and I, have similar stories,
Yep.
even though there were a few years between our kids when they transitioned. But both of us have found a level of peace around
Mhm.
their departing this physical
Yep.
frequency. And I'm really grateful to you for that I found someone who resonates with that, because I know so many peregrines now who are not at peace. And what I wanted to reflect on today, being Christmas Eve and being, holy nights for a lot of people, whether they identify as Christian or not, that this is a time of peace
Mhm.
and introspection and
Mhm.
reflection
Mhm.
for all of us around the world. You know, peace on earth is a big message this time of year, every year. And yet we still struggle with that as human beings. And so even though we've found that sense of peace, these tsunamis come up and they clock us even 15, 20 years later and knock us off of our feet and force us to keep our head above water and breathe the best we can and trust that we can
Mhm.
float, because it will ebb again. It might take a few days, a few weeks,
Mhm.
take a month.
Mhm.
It's different for everybody. You know, the journey of the peregrine, the bird, is a solitary one. And even though we all have our support systems, we all have the people that we can turn to in those times that when we can't talk to anyone else. Um, this is largely, this grief journey is a solitary road
Mhm.
that only the individual can experience in their unique way. So yes, self-care is paramount at this time. And for me, self-care means taking care of my body, eating wholesome foods, not eating junk, not poisoning myself,
Yep.
because the gut and the mind are connected.
Mhm.
And I find that if I'm eating clean and exercising to the degree that I can, because I'm physically disabled as well, um, I navigate these tsunamis a little bit easier, I think. What do you do for self-care in these times?
I think probably very similarly, I've committed to body health. And I think mind body health, but particularly I'll do physical exercise. I make sure that I'm mindful of what I'm eating. As you know, and we've talked about the health and lifestyle changes I've made over the last 2.5+ years. So it's just basically in being more mindful of that. Um, and if I feel like not doing anything strenuous as far as mentally with school, or because now even though school is out right now, I'm kind of paraphrasing an old Alice Cooper song, but school is out right now. I'm still doing preparation. So, I basically just know my limitations, take care of myself, and also not beat myself up because I'm experiencing a tsunami. I think one of the illusions is that when we may anticipate, or a lot of people think, well, I have to have peace every day in order to be successful. No, you don't. You're going to have peace the majority of the time, but there's other days, and this is a microcosm of life, where you're not going to have peace because that's part of the human condition, it's part of what we experience. And the other thing I realize is also what you mentioned about energy and death, is death being an illusion. I go back to one of my favorite books on the Afterlife of Billy Fingers by Annie Kagan. And in that, one of the teachings, and that Billy communicates to Annie, is that death is simply birth in reverse. And that's what I look at. It's a rebirth into a new existence. And I take peace in that. The other thing is that I'm also more aware of signs that occur when I'm feeling like this. Like today, this is Janine transitioned on March 1st. So I get these notifications on my iPhone in terms of how much screen time I've used.
Mhm.
So today it was like, you've used 3 hours and 31 minutes of screen time this week, which was 6% less than what you used last week. Now I could give a crap about 6% less when I'm looking at is 331,
Yeah.
which is which is also 331 was also the date that I launched the podcast.
Wow.
So I look at all of the numbers, and her energy will manifest in numerology.
Yeah.
As I was experiencing again the body memories in dealing with that, she comes up and says to me, I'm here. And this is another way that I want you to remember. I want you to not forget me by re-experiencing what you experienced with me during my end of life chapter. I want you never to forget that. And I look at that as, in some way now, Henry, even as, and this is going to sound weird to many of the early peregrines, but it's a gift because it's another way that through my pain, I remember her fondly.
That's a really hard thing for people to swallow, that we can, some of us, look at this journey, this grief journey, as a gift. Um, I'm so proud of you, by the way, of your transformation physically in the time that I've known you, these past, what, 3, 4, oh gosh, long,
Long time. Since
long enough.
2014,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think both of us are physically half the men we used to be.
absolutely we are. Yeah, yeah.
But
Because
that also, I think that we do, especially peregrines. I see a common um, thing that for both men and women, that we do tend to put on weight.
hmm
And that, for me, seems quite obviously a manifestation of the weight of grief that we're carrying, and a physical buffer between us and the rest of the world.
hmm
Because the rest of the world, unless they've also experienced this, can't begin to comprehend the unpredictability of the grief journey. And so, to protect ourselves, we start to pad ourselves until we end
hmm
up looking like the Michelin Man. And
hmm
so I think then we find along the way, and again, there are different stages of grief. I've talked before about quantum grief, the project I'm working on writing, um, where we move from the Big Bang, I call it, where the universe just explodes into being. It
hmm
just explodes, and we're there in the midst of the chaos, numb and confused and not knowing how to be anymore, because the one core part of our identity, our parenthood, has been plucked away.
hmm
And even for those with multiple kids, an aspect of that has been plucked away, and it's a vital aspect of ourselves. And so, how do we navigate that? And then we move through that first dimension where we start to feel our bodies again and try to sort of make sense of our emotions around it, right? And then the second dimension, we start to notice that other people are also feeling grief, and that there may be other people. We may reach out to support groups and things like that for bereavement and so forth. And then the third dimension is where we start to build our new toolkit to move forward in life. And that's that very thin membrane between mourning and grieving
hmm
that I keep coming back to, because I think it's an important part of this picture for those that are especially early on the journey and having a tough time breaking through that membrane from mourning into grieving. Sometimes it takes years for people, and that's okay. It's normal. That's a really important
hmm
message, to know that what you're experiencing is absolutely okay.
Well, and the time constraints are typically those time constraints that are put on arbitrarily by individuals in society who have bought into the general society narrative that grief is time limited. It goes in linear, predictable stages. And that after a year, we should have put our grief in a little box, buried that, and moved on as if everything is not changed. And when somebody dies, your life changes, and
It all
that's
changes.
it all
Yeah,
changes. Everything changes with every loss, whether it's a pet, whether it's a human. The landscape of your life and your world changes with
that's
every loss. So you're not going to get that piece back. Our job is now to integrate that loss and try to reinvent a world that we now choose to live in spite of what's happened. And because of the challenges that we've experienced and the teachings that we've learned as a result of those challenges we've experienced with our respective losses.
Yeah, and that's why I founded the Lost Travelers Club, because loss is kind of an irony. We're
hmm
all on a journey, we're all going to arrive somewhere. Nobody's really lost, not even our kids. They live on inside of us. We know exactly where they are, always.
hmm
They're in us and through us. And so, you know, that's the irony, but it is about empowerment. It's empowerment to take up your life and make it what you want it to be. I really believe in the human capacity for imagination. Peace is relative. You know, when we look at the fact that we are made up of all the same things as the rest of the universe, the known and unknown universe or universes, right? We're made of the same stuff. And the universe, as far as we can tell, has never been at peace. It is consistent, constant chaos. This world that we were born into, this frequency that we were born into, is made up of chaos and unpredictability, right? That's the same as quantum theory. It's all about the unpredictability. There are things that we can notice, that there are repeated patterns and there are connections and entanglements that we have, but they're not controllable. And so once we sort of lean into that and accept that, acceptance is really the first step in breaking through into grieving from mourning. Then we get to imagine the kind of griever we want to be. And that is something we can control.
Absolutely.
And so when you and I are both in the position of counseling and guiding other people through this journey, how do you meet that with those that you've worked with in terms of finding acceptance and moving through that membrane into active grieving?
Well, I think the first thing is helping them define what acceptance is. A lot of times individuals will think acceptance is synonymous with closure, and those are two different things.
Right.
And somebody might say to me, well, if I accept what has happened, does that mean I am putting closure to the life that I am grieving? And it's absolutely not. Acceptance for me, and what I use myself as an example, means that I have accepted that my world is the way it is. I've accepted that my daughter is a part of my spiritual counsel. She's not a part of my physical life anymore. I've accepted that new relationship. And I've also accepted the fact there are going to be days like what we've talked about where, you know, my body is keeping the score. And, you know, in terms of expressing, you know, expressing my grief or my yearning for her at that particular moment, I've accepted that I am going to take all that there is with the grief journey, the high points, the low points. I'm going to accept that, and I'm going to move forward and commit to a purpose-driven life in honor of and with my daughter, knowing that she is not physically present, but yet spiritually viable. And that's the first thing is what, well, you know, I asked somebody, well, what's acceptance mean to you? Or what doesn't, you know, what are you afraid of? Or what are you fearful of if you go into the stage of acceptance? And a lot of times that'll stop people from moving forward because they believe acceptance is synonymous with closure, and it isn't. It isn't about forgetting. If anything, it's about keeping that person more in memory because you're moving through your grief and you're moving through life and you're re-engaging in life with purpose with that person as a joint character, you know,
Right.
we're as a package deal. And that is all part of the acceptance piece.
Well, and again, that's what the Lost Travelers Club is all about. It's about empowering peregrines to find our purpose again. It's one thing to say the words, but it's another thing to actively manifest that and re-engage with a sense of purpose, a new sense of purpose. It may be completely different. It took me actually physically moving from the place where Cameron was born and transitioned to a completely different community, different environment, different part of the country. I needed a complete change. And now another part of the world. It's taken me on all these adventures, right? I am a traveler. And to be able to, even though this is a solitary journey, to accept and understand that no one is alone unless they want to be, uh,
Mhm.
to understand that we can empower ourselves to imagine a new purpose to fulfill
Mhm.
in collaboration with our kids,
Mhm.
in honor of them, in their name,
Mhm.
speak their names, you know, um, and acknowledge that they are part of you. Our kids are our ancestors now. They are blood relatives that preceded us
Mhm.
into the next world. And so they become our ancestors. And in many cultures, we lean on our ancestors for wisdom inwardly,
Mhm.
to guide us toward our purpose and to channel our grief mindfully, actively into goodness in the name and honor of our children, for me, has been the best way to accept this new experience as a human.
Mhm.
Grief will come to us all. It is
Yep.
a universal life skill. We will all experience grief at some point in our lives. And so, what do we do with that information?
Yeah, and the other thing too is that you mentioned, from a human experience standpoint, thinking that my 18-year-old daughter could be my ancestor is kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
But if you look at it in terms of the whole cycle of life, and I do believe in past life experiences, I think my soul has done this many times. I think your soul has done this many times. I'm sure I believe Cameron's soul, even though I didn't know him, has done this many times before. Janine has done this many times before. So they're taking the wisdom of the soul's wisdom of all of their lifetimes. And now they're in spirit. They're in this kind of universal oneness of energy
That's
where
it.
they bask in love and wisdom. So it isn't that they have the wisdom of 18 years that we've currently known them in this lifetime. It's the wisdoms of past lifetimes that their soul has accumulated that
Infinite.
allowed them to be our ancestors. And that's
Well,
where
yeah.
we have to let our minds go, and we have to look beyond the constraints of what human law dictates is life. And we look at it in terms of, well, how do we define life? Do we define it in past lifetimes? Do we define it in past existences, other existences, parallel existences, however you want to go there?
Mhm.
But it just isn't 18 years for my daughter. It's probably centuries of wisdom that her soul has
Millennia.
accumulated. Millennia, yeah. So, and you throw, where they are, they don't need to watch. So, we throw the concept of physical time out the window and we look at it in terms of lifetimes and phases.
Well, and understanding that embracing the oneness, I think is a universal human quality. No matter what someone's belief, there are people who don't believe in reincarnation. There are people who
Hmm.
believe that there's a heaven that we go to where everything's angels and harps, and it's all valid, and it's all different ways of interpreting the same essential thing. There's actually a science, a fairly new science called epigenetics that has proven that we carry ancestral memory in our very genetic makeup and DNA.
Hmm.
So what does that mean? It could be that the wisdom that you're talking about is a collective soul wisdom
Hmm.
that we all share, that every one of us is part of that bigger oneness, um, and interconnected that way. And so the memories, both positive and negative, that come up in us, those deja vu moments or those
Hmm.
feelings of, I haven't experienced this in this lifetime, but boy, this feels familiar,
Yeah, yeah.
because other ancestors experienced it, and not only our own bloodline ancestors, but our animal ancestors.
Hey, Flat Stanley.
He
He's a
always comes
beautiful,
up.
he's
He's a
beautiful.
good boy. Flat Stanley is my service dog, and he always comes up and wants to be part of the conversation. You know, we all
Yeah.
share the tree of life. We all started out, every living thing, as a single-celled organism. And then we started growing and branching off into different kingdoms, animal kingdom, plant kingdom, so animals and plants are our relatives. And if we look at life in that broader sense, it's a good meditation, I think, for everybody, no matter who you are, no matter what your spiritual path or belief, your faith, to think about the interconnectedness of everything, for me, is a great comfort in dealing with my grief journey, because it softens those sharp edges, like Stanley's ears are so soft, right? It softens those edges to where I can see beyond my immediate challenge and
Mhm.
experience that we all have. We all have those sharp-edged moments. And to come back to the embracing of the interconnectedness of everything, thank you,
Mhm.
I think is a really powerful tool, right? Stanley, do you agree?
Yeah, his ears just went up, so I think that's a yes.
Yes.
Yeah, boy, he's a natural in front of the camera.
He is. He's so photogenic too, but he understands, and he always comes up and cuddles me when I'm talking about Cameron, I'm talking about grief. And this is, I've said this before, I'll say it a million times. I urge everyone out there, every peregrine listening, to consider getting yourself a service dog, because we are all walking around with a degree of post-traumatic stress. And the way that our animal companions can help mitigate those tsunamis that come up, those triggers. He always senses it just before it manifests, and he'll come up and he'll either lean against me like he just did, or he'll lean into my heart, or even against my leg, as if to say, you're not alone, I'm here, and let's get you grounded. That's a very, very special thing, and it's changed the game for me. I've talked about it a lot. I'll keep talking about it. And if you want to know more, listeners, about service dogs, whether you qualify, how do you qualify, how do you get qualified, how do you get tested for PTSD, that will qualify you. And so that was the biggest and best move that I made early on my grief journey, that I went and actually got officially diagnosed, because that opened up a whole new toolkit that I didn't even know was available to me. And I
Yeah.
couldn't have available to me if I didn't have that diagnosis. There is on our website, if you go to losttravelers.org, where's my brain today?
Hmm.
What's my website? Losttravelers.club. Thank
There
you.
you go.
There,
There you
it's
go.
right there. Um, you'll see that there is an official psychological survey, a self-evaluation survey, that you can determine for yourself, gosh, maybe I'm experiencing more symptoms of PTSD than I was even aware of. And then you can go and find help. And having someone officially in the mental health field
Mhm.
diagnose you, because that's the only way to get a diagnosis.
And even if you don't qualify for a service animal, animals just have their own brand of unconditional love and acceptance, and particularly in early grief when, and I can speak for myself, when I held myself hostage to the emotions of guilt and belief that I could have done more to prevent a cancer that my daughter had that was incurable. That was a childhood cancer that she got at 18, that if she was like less than 10 years old, she might have beat the 5-year survival rate of 10 to 15%. Um, I remember her, her cats, particularly her cat Bootsy,
Mhm.
provided so much love and companionship for me. I mean, he loved me when I couldn't love myself.
Right.
And so even if you don't qualify for a service animal, if you have an animal or you're inclined to pick up an animal, get an animal, they'll show you love unconditional. It doesn't matter what kind of day you had. It doesn't matter what you're thinking about yourself. All they're there is, hey, they're just there to love on you. And that's what we need. And they teach us self-love. They can teach us to love ourselves if we let them.
Absolutely. And I understand that there are people who are allergic, there are people who have phobias or fears or are in a living situation where others can't be around animals. And so I think that it's important to acknowledge that even if you're not able to have a Tigger on your lap, then there are other ways. There are definitely other ways and other tools to find. Tell me about Tigger.
Well, first of all, Tigger was Janine's favorite Disney character.
Mhm.
Tigger, he bounced, and he was the only one. He was truly unique. He had a lot of energy, as my daughter did, and she collected 8 million Tiggers. So for me, I don't have any current pets in the house, but I have a couple of Tiggers. When I'm really missing her,
Mm.
I'll hug them, or I'll just hold them, because this is a piece of her. You know, this is something that was very much a part of her life. And Tigger was, he was always bouncing. He was always looking to cheer people up. And Janine was very social, as Tigger was. But whenever I'm missing her, I'll either hold Tigger, I'll hug Tigger. I got a big Tigger in my room that I'll just hug. And when I'm missing her, so Tigger is kind of been symbolic. And I think we're all Tiggers in grief anyway. I mean, we're all going to bounce down the path of grief, as you mentioned earlier. We're going to do it in our own way. We're going to walk it. Nobody can walk it for us, but we can walk our own unique path. But it's up to us to understand each other's paths and not judge it. So, um, Tigger has taught me to bounce. He's taught me to kind of, um, just kind of roll with the punches and try to find the goodness that there is amidst amidst the kind of the chaotic environment that we live in. He can teach us that we can create our own peace and happiness if we so choose. So this is what Tigger means to me. And, so, I mean, I don't have any current pets in the house, so this is the closest I have. So, I mean, I figure Flat Stanley got some airtime. We're going to give Tigger some airtime too.
Yeah.
So
Well, hey,
Jane,
that's a beautiful thing, and it does hold a spot. It does fit the bill, when there's nothing else around. Uh,
mhm,
Even if we can't always choose to be happy or choose to be strong or choose to be resilient or courageous, which are all qualities of the peregrine um, on this journey, there are tools out there and you find what works for you. If you pick up a stuffed animal that belonged to your kid or represents your kid and it doesn't work for you, that's okay. Find something else. Maybe it's a t-shirt. I know a lot of people will make a blanket or a quilt out of
mhm,
their kids' clothing.
yeah,
Um, you know, and I understand that, one of the first things that I did when I started packing up my life after Cameron transitioned was I sorted through the things that were his, and his clothing was very, very powerful because I could still smell him.
mhm,
And what I know to be true is that that scent goes away in time. Your love does not.
yep,
There are certain things that are really hard to remember. I still, after 15 years, have a hard time looking at photographs or
mhm,
videos of him
mhm,
and
mhm,
hearing him laugh or seeing him being goofy or, sweet. Um, and so I avoid them, but I also pull them out on occasion and force myself because I don't want to lose the scent of him. I don't want to lose those qualities of memory, like the scent of him and his clothing.
mhm,
Um, I kept his bed. It's in storage. So it could be something as big as that. I know there are people who don't touch a thing in their child's empty room.
mhm,
They leave it intact. That's a source of comfort.
yep,
Do what you can do. There was too much stuff because he was, 13 when he passed. there was too much stuff, and I had to get rid of a lot of it because I didn't want to carry it around my whole life. And so I boiled it down. It took a lot, it was a long process. And somebody shared with me a picture from, I think it was Architectural Digest, and they were showing me this beautiful room.
Mhm.
Had nothing to do with Cameron, but the wall, the entire wall was covered with shadow boxes. You know what shadow boxes are?
You know, I've heard of them, but I don't know what
They're
they
like,
are.
they're simple frames, but they have depth. So it's like a box that you can hang on the wall. And so what that triggered in me was, rather than lugging around his entire life as a constant burden of reminder and memory, I selected very key articles of clothing that I used as the backing
Mhm.
for these shadow
Mhm.
boxes. And
Mhm.
then I took things that were treasures to him and I hot glued them onto the fabric and made little,
Mhm.
and so I covered my wall with these shadow boxes that were like a Cameron museum. And it reduced things down into manageable
Mhm.
compartments, literally, that I could hang on my wall and turn to in those moments where I needed to remember something, or if he
Mhm.
wanted me to remember something, if he was whispering in my ear, Papa, remember when, I caught that baseball or whatever, and I look at that shadow box and that memory is very much alive and full of his energy. And so, again, that's another tool. It's another way of keeping your child with you and
Yeah.
without.
Yeah, I mean, just like any type of linking object, and this one goes back to Dennis Class's work on continued bonds and linking objects. Anything that can link you to memory of your child, of your loved one, um, that person will come alive through that object. It's almost like you're experiencing the actual event that you're connected to in real time. It's almost like you've been transposed to another time where you're actually living that moment, and that can become very powerful. And during this time when I'm experiencing, in addition to with the body memories, one of the other things I'll do is take more naps, and I'll just allow myself to recharge that way. But I'll look at Tigger. I'll look at another object that I have, which if you got a minute, I'll show you that object too. That's kind of
Yeah.
um, this is probably a cheap, very $2 car deodorizing fan
Hmm.
that that surfaced 6 months after Janine transition, and I don't think it was coincidence that it resurfaced. I had forgotten about it. I think it was meant to resurface. And when I look at this deodorizing fan, I'm transported to probably when she was about 14. We went to a local auto dealer, chain auto dealer, and I remember it was a summer day. She was standing on my right, I was standing on my left. The young man who waited on us had sandy brown hair, had to be probably 18, 19. And she picked out this car fan for me. And of course, I ended up paying for it. She never paid for it. It was just her excuse to get me out of the house. So when she drove, as she did in the Princess in the passenger seat, she would have something that would make the car smell really nice. And so every time I look at this fan, it takes me to that moment, and it's like I'm transported to a different time while living in the present moment. So it's kind of really pretty cool. And I can recall this almost as if it's happening in real time. That also gives me comfort, connection, and tells us that, hey, death is an illusion
Well, and so is time,
and time is an illusion. Yep.
right? That's the other thing that quantum theory has taught, is that it showed us conclusively is that time is not a thing, right? It's only in the
Hmm.
perception. And it takes the human consciousness to perceive things as time. And it's a wave, right? And so, there are things, signs that come up for me as well, tangible things um, that are so obvious to me that is Cameron pointing me in a particular direction. He loved the card game Uno.
Hmm.
And I was walking out in the countryside here in the middle of Spain, in the middle of nowhere. And I found a little Uno card on a walk
Yeah.
out in the countryside. What are the odds that I would find? I just took a road trip with a friend for about a week. And in one of the Airbnbs that we were staying in, sitting on the shelf prominently, front and center, was an Uno game. And it was, again, it's I mean, I know they're prolific, but it's the moments that they show up where time and space disappear. A memory brings you back to a moment that's as real as the moment you're sitting in.
Mhm.
Embrace that, lean into that, find comfort in that, look for that, be open to those moments because they are there.
And
Uh,
I think actively seek out those moments too during times of, during the holidays, which are when are can be particularly challenging. It's search for those memories that will connect you to the memory of your child.
I haven't decorated since his transition. I haven't really, I used to deck the halls. I mean, we loved putting up our tree every year, decorating it and stringing popcorn and cranberries and, baking gingerbread, all those things that everybody does, decorating. He used to save his Halloween candy. See, talking about this triggered a memory that I hadn't
Mhm.
thought about for years, maybe a decade.
Mhm.
I thought about this. He used to save his Halloween candy every year. He would bring a pillowcase and fill it, and he'd pick out his choice bits. He'd always pick out the Butterfinger for me. And all the rest of that candy he would save to decorate a gingerbread house at Christmas time. And they were magnificent and they were beautiful. And that memory just came up for me. Beautiful. That to me is the Christmas spirit. That is the
Mhm.
holiday spirit that we can access, Peregrines. We can. It doesn't have to be a death sentence for
No.
finding the spirit of the holidays. It lives in our memories and it lives with our children in our hearts because every time we remember them, every time we speak their name and talk about them, they're alive. They're right there.
Mhm.
Time and space disappears and we can appreciate the time that we had physically with them. So I guess as we wrap up, hope is not lost. We are one with the entire universe, and that includes our kids and all of our ancestors. And if we can sit there and take that in for a moment and listen in the echoes of memory for your child's laugh, for something silly that they might have done or said, reach back, sit with those moments, and find a place of peace and gratitude. It's in all of us. I don't care how your child transitioned or what the trauma you've been carrying is. You have two peregrines right here to tell you that there's another side. You'll get there. You'll get there. Keep reaching out. Keep talking about it. Keep talking about them. And you'll get through the season. The season will feel a little kinder, I think. David,
I
you want to
think,
add anything?
yeah, I was just, so the thing that came into my head is when you were talking about hope. Hope is only lost if we choose not to find it. So, and that's something that kind of resonated with me when you were talking about hope. But, um, look, I mean, I tell people, even if you haven't experienced a catastrophic loss, even if you're not a peregrine, life isn't going to be happy. It's not going to be it's not going to be a box of chocolates all the time. Um, there's going to be some kind of foul smelling stuff in the midst of the chocolate that we have to deal with. And it's just a microcosm of life. So we deal with it, we learn from it, and we don't let it overwhelm us. In early grief, it's easy to let those challenging moments overwhelm us. Now I look at it as saying, okay, it's happening, it's occurred. what can I do to get through this? What can I do to redefine it? What can I do to learn from it? But it wasn't that easy of a transition. And it's going to, as you mentioned earlier about time is relative. It will take as long as it's going to take to get from the raw pain of grief to the acceptance that you're willing to re-engage in a world that is different without the presence of our children. And as long as there is forward movement, as you're taking one step at a time, and it doesn't matter how fast you're moving, doesn't matter how slow you're moving, as long as there is movement, there is progress, and you will get to that point of acceptance.
Beautiful. You know, so a thought just popped into my head, and we'll close on this. The image of water and the spirit of water comes up for me a lot, whether it's in talking about the tsunamis
Mhm.
or whether it's talking about whitewater rapids, where it feels like things are going a mile a minute out of control and you're flailing around trying to find something to grasp onto when everything feels out of control.
Yep.
In any of those cases, water is a solvent. When you step in a big pile of shit, take off your shoes and wash them. It will wash away that foul smell. It'll wash away the
Mhm.
debris. When you find yourself caught in a whitewater situation, lean into it, lean back, put your feet up, and let the water carry you around those boulders, because it will take you to calmer waters eventually. Right? You
Mhm.
ever put a leaf in a stream as a kid and watch it go around the rocks and sticks and all that? We do the same thing on a more philosophical level. And with the
Mhm.
tsunamis, just they'll come. They will come. You can't predict when or how strong they'll be, but trust that you can float. When you try to cling on, they tell you, if your plane goes down, right, and people are drowning, don't cling on to each other, because you're going to all drown faster. Right? Lean
Yep.
back and float. Use your flotation device, right? And we have that. That's built into us. And so trust that you can float. Trust that you can float on your own. And if you need someone to share their flotation with you, there are ways to do that too. Okay. We do have that as a free service through the Lost Travelers Club. If you need help floating, reach out. Become a member of the Lost Travelers Club. Again, go to losttravelers.club. You can sign up there. Membership is free. And we are getting there together. We are surviving parents, getting there together. Thanks, Dave. Happy
My pleasure.
Christmas.
Happy Christmas, Henry, and everybody out there. I wish everybody a very peace-filled holiday with many moments of peace, many moments of joy. I wish that for everybody on the journey.
And on behalf of all the Peregrines that are members of the Lost Travelers Club and the Peregrine Council of veteran Peregrines who have been years, decades down this road, we wish you a peaceful season and a kind season to your hearts. All right. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.